As men cross into their 60s, many are caught off guard by an unsettling change that seems to happen almost overnight, a sudden drop in their sex drive. That once constant spark that used to ignite at the slightest thought or touch now feels weaker, slower to appear, or sometimes missing entirely. And this shift can be deeply confusing, even alarming, because for decades desire seemed like something automatic, not something you had to consciously coax into existence. And while society often chalks it up to just aging, the truth, as many urologists will tell you, is that there are very specific biological, psychological, and lifestyle factors working together to change how your body responds, many of which can be understood and even reversed if you know what's really happening under the surface. So let's start with one of the most significant culprits: testosterone decline, because after 30, men naturally lose about 1% of their testosterone each year, and by the time you reach 60, your levels can be 30 to 40% lower than they were in your prime, which doesn't just affect sexual desire but also impacts energy, mood, muscle mass, and even how you respond to touch. And lower testosterone means the brain's sexual centers don't receive the same intensity of signals from your body, so the mental switch that used to flip easily now feels sluggish. But hormones are only one piece of the puzzle, because blood flow plays just as big of a role, and with age, arteries can become stiffer and narrower due to years of cholesterol buildup, high blood pressure, diabetes, or simply less physical activity, meaning the same circulation issues that raise your heart risk also limit the amount of oxygen-rich blood that reaches your pelvic region, making arousal slower, erections less firm, and physical stimulation less satisfying. Yet what many men overlook is that psychological shifts also creep in. Retirement can bring a loss of daily purpose. Stress about health or finances can dampen mood, and unresolved relationship tensions can subtly erode intimacy until the body responds by lowering desire as a kind of protective mechanism. And if you've battled depression, chronic pain, or prolonged stress, your body produces more cortisol, which not only competes with testosterone but also dampens the dopamine-driven reward pathways that fuel sexual motivation. And then there's medication. Many of the prescriptions common after 60, from blood pressure pills to antidepressants to prostate drugs, can quietly reduce libido without you realizing it, and because men often start multiple medications around this age, it can be difficult to pinpoint the real cause. But the bottom line is that sudden drops in drive are rarely random. They're usually a signal from your body that one or more systems are out of balance, and the good news is, once you identify which ones are at play, there are steps you can take to restore not only your sexual desire but also your overall vitality. Because your drive is a reflection of your body's total health, and when you address the root causes, whether through optimizing hormone levels, improving circulation, reducing stress, or fine-tuning your medication, you're not just reigniting intimacy, you're adding years of energy, confidence, and connection to your life. And in the next part, we'll dig deeper into the exact physical changes that happen after 60, and why understanding them is the first step toward taking back control. As men cross the threshold of 60, the intricate balance of the body's hormonal, neurological, and vascular systems can begin to shift in subtle but powerful ways, and this is where many discover that their once steady sexual drive has begun to dip without warning, leaving them puzzled, embarrassed, or even worried that something is wrong with them. However, understanding the actual biological and lifestyle factors behind this change can not only reduce the anxiety it causes but also empower men to take specific, effective action that can reignite their vitality. One major culprit is the gradual decline in testosterone production, a process called andropause, which doesn't happen overnight but accumulates over decades. Even a drop of 1% per year after the age of 30 means that by 60, a man's levels can be 30 to 40% lower than in his youth, affecting not just libido but also energy, mood, muscle tone, and even the ability to concentrate. But testosterone is only part of the story. Blood flow, a critical factor for both sexual desire and performance, can be restricted by age-related changes in the arteries due to plaque buildup or stiffening of vessel walls. And these vascular changes are often invisible until they begin to impact areas of life that men value most. Then there's the neurological element, Sexual desire starts in the brain, not the genitals, and decades of stress, unresolved emotional issues, depression, or even long-standing relationship tensions can dampen neural pathways linked to arousal. Add to this the reality that medications commonly prescribed after 60, such as for blood pressure, cholesterol, or prostate health, can have side effects that directly suppress drive, sometimes subtly enough that men blame themselves rather than recognizing a pharmacological cause. Poor sleep quality, often worsened by sleep apnea or frequent nighttime urination, further sabotages the body's ability to regulate hormones, and without restorative rest, the signals for desire are blunted before a man even starts his day. Nutritional choices play a surprisingly large role too. Diets high in refined carbs and low in zinc, magnesium, and healthy fats can starve the body of the raw materials it needs to produce sex hormones, while chronic dehydration can reduce energy and endurance in ways men mistake for aging. Even chronic inflammation, triggered by hidden food intolerances, excess sugar, or untreated gum disease, can interfere with hormonal balance and blood vessel health, meaning that something as simple as better oral care can, over time, help rekindle drive. Urologists emphasize that the psychological component is equally critical. When a man begins to notice a decline, his confidence can take a hit, and that self-consciousness can create a feedback loop where anxiety about performance reduces desire even more, which then confirms his fears and makes the cycle harder to break. This is why many men, instead of trying to push through alone, benefit from reframing this drop not as a sign of inevitable decline but as a signal that the body needs tuning, just like a classic car that's too valuable to neglect. And by taking a systematic approach that addresses sleep, nutrition, exercise, mental health, and medical evaluation, the loss of drive can often be slowed, stopped, or even reversed. The good news is that the human body at 60 or 70 is far more adaptable than most men believe. With the right changes and guidance, it's not just possible to restore desire, but to enjoy a deeper, more satisfying intimate life than in their younger years because experience, emotional connection, and intentional effort combine to create something more meaningful than mere youthful spontaneity. Many men assume that a sudden drop in sexual drive after 60 is purely a normal part of aging, and that nothing can be done about it. But the truth is far more complex and often far more hopeful, because while some gradual changes in desire can be expected as testosterone levels taper off, what's rarely explained is that these changes are heavily influenced by lifestyle, habits, emotional health, and hidden medical issues that can be reversed or improved if addressed properly. And this is where the conversation shifts from resignation to action, because the male body at 60 is still perfectly capable of maintaining a healthy sex drive if it is given the right conditions to thrive, starting with understanding that testosterone production is only part of the equation and that dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin also play major roles in sexual motivation and satisfaction. Meaning that even if your blood test shows normal testosterone for your age, you can still feel a noticeable decline. If your brain chemistry is off due to stress, lack of novelty in your relationship, or chronic fatigue, and one of the biggest but least discussed factors is poor sleep quality, because men who sleep less than 6 hours per night often have 15 to 20% lower testosterone levels compared to those who get a solid 7 to 8 hours. As deep REM sleep is when the body produces and releases the most testosterone. Which means that your drive problem could actually be a sleep problem in disguise, and the same goes for nutrition, because diets high in refined sugar, excessive alcohol, and processed fats can spike insulin and promote inflammation, which doesn't just affect the heart but also impairs blood flow to the pelvic region and signals the brain to prioritize survival functions over reproduction, making desire naturally fade. And another silent culprit is chronic stress, because when your cortisol levels stay elevated, the brain suppresses the production of sex hormones to conserve energy, a primitive survival mechanism that's not helpful in modern life but still very active in our biology. And that's why men in high-pressure jobs or those carrying long-term emotional burdens often see their sex drive evaporate even when their physical health seems fine. And this is where many urologists now recommend a more holistic approach, integrating cardiovascular exercise to boost blood flow and nitric oxide levels. weight training to stimulate testosterone, mindfulness or relaxation, techniques to lower cortisol, and relationship-focused activities that rebuild emotional intimacy. Because desire in long-term relationships often needs intentional rekindling, novelty, touch, and shared experiences act as powerful triggers for the brain's reward centers, reigniting the same chemistry you felt decades ago. And if you think this sounds too simple, it's worth noting that studies on couples over 60 who actively schedule time for sensual touch, not just intercourse, show measurable increases in oxytocin and self-reported desire after only a few weeks, meaning that even without pills or hormone therapy, many men can restore much of what they've lost simply by making deliberate changes to lifestyle, mindset, and emotional connection. And when those aren't enough, modern medicine offers targeted options such as testosterone replacement therapy, TRT, when levels are truly low, PDE5 inhibitors for erectile support, and newer regenerative treatments like shockwave therapy to restore blood vessel function. But these should be considered only after a full evaluation to ensure the underlying cause is identified and addressed, because treating the symptom without fixing the root often leads to frustration and dependence on short-term fixes instead of lasting results. And what's most important to understand is that losing your drive is not an inevitable one-way street. Biology is adaptable. The brain is highly plastic, and even after 60, with the right combination of physical care, emotional reconnection, and medical guidance, men can experience not just a return to former levels of desire but in many cases a deeper, more satisfying intimacy than they had in their younger years. Because now it's driven not only by raw chemistry but by the emotional depth and life experience that only time can provide. When you've reached a stage in life where you've seen decades of love, relationships, and physical passion, it can be jarring to feel your own body's desires shift. But here's the powerful truth: your libido is not gone, it's simply asking you to pay attention in new ways. Because after 60, your sexual health is less about automatic, hormone-driven urges and more about creating the conditions that awaken desire naturally. And that means being intentional with how you live each day, because the men who still have a vibrant sex drive in their 70s, 80s, and even 90s aren't necessarily the ones with perfect genetics. They're the ones who actively nurture the physical, emotional, and sensory parts of themselves that keep intimacy alive, starting with circulation, because without healthy blood flow, even the best intentions can fall flat. That means prioritizing daily movement, like a brisk morning walk, gentle resistance exercises, or even yoga to keep arteries flexible and boost nitric oxide production, which directly impacts your ability to feel aroused and maintain erections. And equally important is learning how to prime your mind for intimacy, since desire often begins in the brain before it ever reaches the body. So if your mental space is cluttered with stress, fatigue, or unresolved tension with your partner, your drive can be muted no matter how physically capable you are. Which is why practices like meditation, breathing exercises, or simply taking time to laugh, flirt, and connect without pressure can reignite that internal spark. Because many men make the mistake of treating sex like a performance rather than a shared experience, and that mindset shift alone can instantly make touch feel more exciting again. But we also have to address one of the most overlooked yet common factors in post-60 libido drops: medication side effects, as certain drugs for blood pressure, depression, or cholesterol can quietly dull sexual function over time. So it's worth having an open conversation with your doctor about possible alternatives, dose adjustments, or adding supplements that can counteract those effects safely. Because sometimes it's not age stealing your drive, it's a pill in your cabinet. And while you're making these adjustments, don't underestimate the role of diet in fueling passion, as nutrient-dense foods like dark chocolate, pomegranate juice, fatty fish, and leafy greens feed the circulatory system, balance hormones, and keep energy levels steady throughout the day, which means you arrive in intimate moments feeling physically ready rather than drained. And just as important is the willingness to explore new forms of touch, pacing, and stimulation that may not have been part of your routine in your younger years but can now become powerful tools for reigniting desire. Because our bodies change, but pleasure is still available. It just comes from leaning into curiosity and connection rather than rushing, and perhaps the Most inspiring thing to remember is that intimacy after 60 can actually become deeper, more passionate, and more satisfying than at any other time in your life, precisely because you have the wisdom, the patience, and the emotional depth to savor every moment without the self-consciousness or pressure of youth. So instead of mourning the drive you think you've lost, start investing in the conditions that allow it to naturally rise again, knowing that desire is not a gift that fades with age. It's a garden that will bloom beautifully if you keep tending to it with the right mix of physical health, mental openness, and genuine human connection.